Well, I guess I'll get to this giant footnote in a second. Um, so a letter to Bennett Langton, Esquire, at Langton near Spilsby, Lincolnshire. Dear Sir, in supporting that I should be more than commonly affected by the death of Peregrine Langton, this was Mr. Langton's uncle, you were not mistaken. He was not one of those whom I loved at once by instinct and by reason. I have seldom indulged more hope of anything than of being able to improve our acquaintance to friendship. Many a time have I placed myself again at Langton, and imagined the pleasure with which I should walk to Partney, that's the place of residence of Mr. Peregrine Langton, in a summery morning. But this is no longer possible. We must now endeavor to preserve what is left of us, his example of piety and economy. I hope you make what inquiries you can, and write down what is told you. The little things which distinguish domestic character are soon forgotten. If you delay to inquire, you will have no information. If you neglect to write, information will be vain. Now comes a very long footnote. Mr. Langton did not disregard this counsel, but wrote the following account, which he has been pleased to communicate to me being Boswell writing this footnote. Quote, the circumstances of Mr. Peregrine Langton were these. He had an annuity for life of £200 per annum. He resided in a village in Lincolnshire. The rent of his house, with 2 or 3 small fields, was £28. The county he lived in was not more than moderately cheap. His family consisted of a sister, who paid him £18 annually for her board, and a niece. The servants were 2 maids and 2 men in livery. His common way of living at his table was 3 or 4 dishes. The appurtenances to his table were neat and handsome. He frequently entertained company at dinner, and then his table was well served with as many dishes as were usual at the tables of the other gentlemen in their neighborhood. His own appearance, as to clothes, was genteelly neat and plain. He had always a postchaise, and kept 3 horses. Goes on. Such, with the resources I have mentioned, was his way of living, which he did not suffer to employ his whole income. For he had always a sum of money lying by him for any extraordinary expenses that might arise. Some money he put into the stocks. At his death, the sum he had there amounted to £150. He purchased out of his income his household furniture and linen, of which latter he had a very ample store, and as I am assured by those that had very good means of knowing, not less than the 10th part of his income was set apart for charity. At the time of his death, the sum of £25 was found, with the direction to be employed in such uses. He had laid down a plan of living proportioned to his income, and did not practice any extraordinary degree of parsimony, but endeavored that in his family there should be plenty without waste. As an instance that this was his endeavor, it may be worth while to mention a method he took in regulating a proper allowance of malt liquor to be drunk in his family, that there might not be a deficiency of any intemperate profusion. On a complaint made that his allowance of a hogshead in the month was not enough for his own family, he ordered that quantity of hogshead to be put into bottles, and had it locked up from the servants, and distributed out every day 8 quarts, which is the quantity each day at 1 hogshead in a month. I don't know what they're talking about. And told his servants that if that did not suffice, he would allow them more. But by this method it appeared at once that the allowance was much more than sufficient for his small family, and this proved a clear conviction that could not be answered and saved all future dispute. I guess hogshead was some kind of maybe it was sort of like whale oil or something, some kind of domestic usage. I don't think they ate it. He was, in general, very diligently and punctually attended and obeyed by his servants. He was very considerate as to the injunctions he gave and explained them distinctly. And, at their first coming to his service, steadily exacted a close compliance with them, without any remission. And the servants, finding this to be the case, soon grew habitually accustomed to the practice of their business, and then very little further attention was necessary. On extraordinary instances of good behavior or diligent service, he was not wanting in particular encouragements and presents above their wages. It is remarkable that he would permit their relationships to visit them and stay at his house 2 or 3 days at a time. That's pretty nice, I guess, if you're going to have servants to let their relatives stay at your house for that time period. The wonder with most that hear an account of his economy will be how he was able, with such an income, to do so much, especially when it is considered that he paid for everything he had. He had no land except the 2 or 3 small fields which I have said he rented, and instead of gaining anything by their produce, I have reason to think he lost by them. However, they furnished him with no further assistance towards his housekeeping than grass for his horses, not hay, for that I know he bought, and for 2 cows. Every Monday morning he settled his family's accounts, and so kept up a constant attention to the confining his expenses within his income. And to do it more exactly, compared those expenses with the computation he had made how much that income would afford him every week and day of the year. One of his economical practices was, as soon as any repair was wanting in or about his house, to have it immediately performed. When he had money to spare, he chose to lay it in a provision of linen or clothes, or any other necessaries. As then, he said, he could afford it when he might not be so well able to do when the actual want came. In consequence of which method he was a considerable supply of necessary articles lying by him, besides what was in use. But the main particular that seems to have enabled him to do so much with his income was that he paid for everything as soon as he had it, except alone what were current accounts such as rent for his house and servants' wages. And these he paid at the stated time with the utmost exactness. He gave notice to the tradesmen of the neighborhood market towns that they should no longer have his custom if they let out of his servants having anything without their paying for it. Thus he put it out of his power to commit those imprudences to which those are liable to defer their payments by using their money some other way than where it ought to go. And whatever money he had by him, he knew that it was not demanded any elsewhere, but that he might safely deploy it as he pleased. His example was confined by the sequestered place of his abode to the observation of few, though his prudence and virtue would have made it valuable to all who could have known it. These few particulars, which I knew myself, or have obtained from those who lived with him, may afford instruction and be an incentive to the wise art of living which he so successfully practiced. And that's the end of that footnote. I ran 2 pages, and that was, I'm guessing, Mr. Langton writing about his uncle, Mr. Peregrine Langton, who was a frugal sort, and that's what he was known for. Neither a lender nor borrower be. So anyway, let's get back to this letter from Johnson to Langton and the manner of his uncle's passing. Shall we? His art of life certainly deserves to be known and studied. He lived in plenty and elegance upon an income which, to many, would appear indignant and to most scanty. How he lived, therefore, every man has an interest in knowing. Well, we just found out how he did it. His death, I hope, was peaceful. It was surely happy. So all you have to do to live frugally in those days is pay your debts and save your linen, I guess. And bottle your hogshead for the month, and then dole it out. Anyway. I wish I had written sooner, lest, writing now, I should renew your grief, but I would not forbear saying that I have now what I have now said. This loss, I hope, the only misfortune of a family to whom no misfortune at all should happen, is if my wishes could avert it. Let me know how you all go on. Has Mr. Langton got him the little horse that I recommended? It would do him good to ride about his estate in fine weather. Be pleased to make my compliments to Mrs. Langton, and to dear Miss Langton, and Miss Di, and Miss Juliet, and to everybody else. The club holds very well together. Monday is not my night. I continue to rise tolerably well, and read more than I did. I hope something will yet come of it. I am, sir, your most affectionate servant, May 10th, 1766, Johnson's Court, Fleet Street, Sam Johnson. Now there's a footnote about when Johnson said, Monday is my night, in which Boswell says, of his being in the chair of the literary club, which at this time met once a week in the evening. So Monday is his night to be the chair, I guess. After I had been some time in Scotland, this being Boswell again, I mentioned to Johnson in the letter that on my first return to my native country, after some years of absence, I was told of a vast number of my acquaintances who were all gone to the land of forgetfulness, and I found myself like a man stalking over a field of battle, who every moment perceives someone lying dead. I complained of irresolution, and mentioned my having made a vow as a security for good conduct. I wrote to him again without being able to move his indolence, nor did I hear from him till he had received a copy of my inaugural exercise, or a thesis in civil law, which I published at my admission as an advocate, as is the custom in Scotland. He then wrote to me as follows. To James Boswell, Esquire. Dear Sir, the reception of your thesis put me in a mind of my debt to you. Why did you, and then there is several asterisks, and there's a footnote to this that says, the passage omitted alluded to a private transaction. And then there's a footnote from later on which indicates, from another editor, saying, Boswell's copy at Yale supplies the lacuna. Why had he dedicated to Lord Montessart a man he did not like? Okay, so that's what Boswell's censoring from this letter. So going back to what Johnson's saying, I will punish you for it by telling you that your Latin wants correction. Now we have another footnote. This censure of my Latin relates to the dedication, which was as follows. And then the dedication, I guess, is on this next page. And it is all in Latin, so I will not read it. It's very long, but I will read the translation of it. James Boswell dedicates this, the first fruits of his legal study, as a token of devoted friendship and respect, to the honored companion of his Italian travels, to the most noble John Viscount Montestewart, of kingly line, the second hope of the noble family of Bute, a man ever mindful of his ancient and illustrious blood in a degenerate age, when men of no origin strive to equal birth with riches, who by his virtues enhances the splendor of his birthright, already a member of the House of Commons, but destined by hereditary right to the House of Lords, with an education that advances native talent. And it quotes from Horace, Doctrina sed vim promovet incitam, but does not display itself of ancient faith, liberal understanding, and elegance of manners. So, in case you're confused with what's going on here, Johnson's writing to Boswell about his thesis. He asked in a censored part that we found out from a later editor, he asked why he dedicated it to somebody he doesn't like. And then Johnson said, I will punish you for it by telling you that your Latin wants correction. And then we had the dedication that Boswell wrote in Latin, which I did not read, but I did write the translation of that. And it was basically Boswell kissing ass to somebody that apparently he doesn't like. And then we have now corrections from Johnson to Boswell's Latin. In the beginning, spy altere, not to urge that it should be prime, is not grammatical. Aliriae should be alteri. In the next line, you seem to use genus absolutely for what we call family, that is, for illustrious extraction. I doubt without authority. Hominis nullis originis for nullis ortae majoribus or nullo loco nati is, I am afraid, barbarous. Rudimen is dead. So that's Johnson correcting Boswell's Latin. I have now vexed you enough, and will try to please you. Your resolution to obey your father I sincerely approve. But do not accustom yourself to enchain your volatility by vows. They will sometimes leave a thorn in your mind, which you will, perhaps, never be able to extract or reject. Take this warning, it is of great importance. The study of law is what you very justly term it, copious and generous. Boswell says, this alludes to the first sentence of the proemium of my thesis. And then there's some Latin, which is translated as, no study is more copious or more generous than jurisprudence, for it is discussing laws we pay regard both to the manners of peoples and to the vicissitudes from which laws take their rise. Back to the letter. And in adding your name to its professors, you have done exactly what I always wished, when I wished you best. I hope that you will continue to pursue it vigorously and constantly. You gain, at least, what is so no small an advantage, security from those troublesome and wearisome discontents, which are always obtruding themselves upon a mind vacant, unemployed, and undetermined. You ought to think it no small inducement to diligence and perseverance, that they will please your father. We all live upon the hope of pleasing somebody, and the pleasure of pleasing ought to be greatest, and at last always will be greatest, when our endeavors are exerted in consequence of our duty. Life is not long, and too much of it must not pass in idle deliberation how it shall be spent. Deliberation, which those who begin by prudence and continue with subtlety must, after long expense of thought, conclude by chance. This is true. That's me. To prefer one future mode of life to another, upon just reasons, requires faculties which it has not pleased our Creator to give us. If, therefore, the profession you have chosen has some unexpected inconveniences, console yourself by reflecting that no profession is without them, and that all the importunities, and perplexities of business are softness and luxury compared with the incessant cravings of vacancy, and the unsatisfactory expedients of idleness. Then there's some Latin here, which I will read just for fun. Hoc sunt quo nostra potuae te voce monere vade age. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, probably not. But it's pronounced, it's translated as, of course, such the warnings that the voice of mine may give thee. Go then. And that's from the Aeneid. But Virgil wrote, Illicat te voce monere. Okay, so somebody else is nitpicking on Boswell's Johnson's translation of that. Anyway, who cares? As to your history of Corsica, you have no materials which others have not or may not have. You have, somehow or other, warmed your imagination. I wish there were some cure, like the lover's leap, for all heads of which some single idea has obtained an unreasonable and regular possession. Mind your own affairs, and leave the Corsicans to theirs. I am, dear sir, your most humble servant, London, August 21st, 1766, Sam Johnson. So that was the letter from Johnson to Boswell about Boswell's thesis, in which he took umbrage with Boswell's Latin and also said, you know, you had to pick some profession. Better that than doing what I do, which is just loaf around. And then he was nitpicking on, I guess, Boswell's history of Corsica, saying it wasn't really worth anything and let the Corsicans do their own thing. Anyway, that's it for today. A little confusing reading because there were a lot of footnotes, but and a lot of Latin. But no Latin. Latin did not show up. Latin did. Yeah, I'm confusing myself now. Anyway, bye from Boswell.